Hello, hello. Welcome to the 19th episode of BINJ Live. I'm one of your hosts, Jason Pramas, Executive Director of the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. And yes, I did it right.
Faraone.
Over there is Chris Faraone, Editorial Director of BINJ. How you doing, Chris?
Here, present.
Here,
Good.
we are present.
Yeah.
So, today we're going to at least start off with the issue of the moment, and there are so very many to choose from, but we'll just say it, idiotic war that our nation's glorious current leaders have started with Iran, and with the U.S.'s good and great friends in Israel, and it's starting to kind of engulf the Middle East, and it's I think, absolutely capable of touching us here in the U.S. in ways that we probably haven't experienced before in the previous series of conflicts and police actions and wars of various descriptions that the U.S. has been involved in, certainly in my 59 years on the planet, or Chris's 46. Just keep doing it. But we also, we thought we'd at least spend some time talking about, just journalists, like every news outlet, every publication that you may run into, online, offline, whatever, and the editors or producers, may not, publishers may not be explicit about it, but every outlet has an editorial line of some kind, meaning, position that's sort of the position of the publication.
Well, a lot of the time, though, that's really one or two assholes or good people with an opinion. I mean, and depending on how open they are about what that really is, but just to be so people realize, we're a small operation. People know that, but there are some operations that are barely bigger than us that, they put on a tie and pretend, and now it's an editorial board instead of two people on a Zoom.
But, and it's true that, a couple of loud columnists or whatever, or personalities can kind of tar the outlet with a particular view, which it may not actually have as an organization. In our case, though, we're small. So it should come as no surprise to anybody that reads us or views us or listens to us or whatever you do with us, that we're pretty firmly in the anti-war camp, when these kinds of conflicts come up. We don't think it's the route to a better planet, and so I mean, typically, especially since a lot of the rest of what's left of the news sector tends to be dismissive of anti-war movements, we kind of want to double down and make sure it's getting coverage, even though we ourselves, as we will probably discuss, we have our own critiques. When you cover anything, you kind of get in there and learn things, I hope, about what you're covering. And, you have, as a journalist, you're going to have opinions. If you come out of the journalism traditions we do, you're going to wear those opinions, on your sleeve pretty much. You're going to be like, this is my opinion, this is our opinion, and now let's discuss this. That you all know what our opinion is if it wasn't obvious. Now let's do some news. Let's do some news analysis. So, This current war just got started 4 days ago, basically. Although, in truth, I've seen it said that it goes back to the U.S. assassination of the top Iranian military commander in 2020. I'm spacing on his name, but some people say it's really the same conflict. Some say, well, we've had 14 years of sanctions, really heavy ones, on Iran, so, and I hope I don't, pardon me if I say Iraq by accident when I don't mean to. I hope I didn't do that.
You're
talking about Iran right now. What?
Are you running?
Yeah, right. No, Iraq will come up, I'm sure, in the course of the conversation, but Iran is what we're talking about. There's been sanctions in Iran 14 years. I mean, we basically, though, the U.S., I should say, the U.S. government, the various Republican and Democratic governments have had all kinds of sanctions and other stuff on Iran for 47 years, since the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I am born in '79, and I think it goes back to '79. I am not the one
So it's
to
not
discuss
new.
the history, but I mean, I'm
Yeah.
here to talk about the contemporary media aspect. But
I mean,
yeah.
it's not a surprise is all I'm saying, like that this is happening. Like this is, and the Trump administration was certainly telegraphing this. Like last summer they did that thing, oh, we destroyed all the nuclear weapons, and and it's like now we're going in because there's maybe going to be nuclear weapons, which the US has been saying for like decades. That any moment there's going to be nuclear weapons, and then people like me would be like, yeah, but the now assassinated Ayatollah Khamenei had a fatwa, an edict against nuclear weapons as un-Islamic, as something that Shia Muslims at least will not countenance. This country, he said, is not going to go there, right? And so here we are that we're dropping bombs in this country to, I guess, liberate them somehow. And one of the excuses, although there have already been several excuses coming out of the Trump administration, is like, oh, the nukes. Which is like, no, they have a civilian nuke program.
Well, the nuke program's real. However knockback it was, and that's of course all interesting with the bombing that was already done, the lies that were told in regard to that. I just want to take it back just to a personal experience, as annoying as that can be, because honestly, it's even though we've been in a perpetual state of war my entire adult life. I graduated college in December 2001. I was in New York City working on a Democratic primary for Paul Bader, Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez's husband, running for District 39 in Brooklyn on September 11, 2001. And honestly, I've seen it all. And it's funny because I know that all the people who were watching me and mentoring me, and even people who are, 10, 15 years older than me, like Jason, they knew this, they'd already seen this. And it's just so predictable. It's so pathetic that, pacifism is naivete, and it's just the same playbook every time. And everyone becomes a genius. It's football. It's football all over again, but with war and with billions of dollars on the line, even more money than football, and way more lives, right? And I gotta say, it's the same thing. We say, oh, and by the way, as far as the dismissiveness, and I'm going to throw it back. I think I have a question. I have an important question for you about this. But as far as dismissiveness, this made me really think of, I worked on that campaign, that city council campaign in New York, and one presidential campaign before I flipped and went to became a reporter, right? And that presidential campaign was for Dennis Kucinich. All right, legendary. He's come up on this cast before, right? Legendary congressman from Ohio, little guy, and Dennis Kucinich, of course, proposed. I hadn't thought of this. The Department of Peace.
Yes, that's
and was laughed at. When I say laughed at, I was there. He was physically, audibly laughed at by journalists, right? By reporters, by forget about pundits, by the other people running against him, by other Democrats. He got way more hell for that than Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth have gotten for the renaming it the Department of Defense, the Department of War. And I think that says so much. I mean, and of course, it's a parallel to how there's no room for any progressive thought under the Democratic tent, but there's room for literal fucking Nazis on the right, in the Republican Party. Now,
sure,
it mirrors it perfectly. So I did, but my question to you is, what is the difference? And of course, we can no longer I am one of the schmucks who, of course, never lauded Donald Trump, but I would say, it was always nice to throw in the face of Democrats in particular. At least he's not a warmongering freak, and and it wasn't just the fact that he wasn't actually starting wars. He was also kind of, sending some neocons on their ass, packing people who had been in government so long they probably had apartments under the Pentagon. So my question to you is, even though we certainly cannot call Donald Trump an isolationist any longer, he's invaded 2 countries this year. He's making a play for Greenland,
maybe,
Anyway, so. But what is the difference in definition as far as you see it between isolationism and pacifism?
Well, you can be someone who's against all war and not be interested in being a pure nationalist that refuses to engage the outside world in any way, which isn't even real. I mean, even isolationists have, interact with the rest of the world. Typically, if they're on the stage, on the national stage, in this country, at least, you're also on the international stage, no matter what you do. Right. So, so even if they're saying, we don't want any more wars, we don't want to also pay for the, like the Trump administration has been saying, not entirely incorrectly, we don't want to pay for the protection of other countries from other threats. Like, we just want to do our own thing, right? That is a different position than a lot of pacifists. A lot of pacifists are internationalists. In fact, there used to be this old crew called the World Federalists. There were very few of them left even when I was young. I don't know if we can look, but I mean, I don't think there's a lot of them left now. They wanted one world government, like the worst nightmare of MAGA types and stuff. And I think probably should be at least considered as a nightmare by people on the left as well. Depends. But, they meant well, like they were nice people. They just thought, we're not going to end war until there's one government, even if it's like very confederal and loose, but more than the UN. They weren't, correctly, they weren't satisfied with the UN. The UN is really turned into a shit show. It doesn't, it's better I think to have it in the balance than not have it, but its ability to really do stuff that might benefit regular people on the ground in any country is much denuded, and it's often used as a cover for other bad stuff.
Good so word. Put that word on our list of words people can learn if they watch this show. Denuded.
Yes. Reduced by degrees. Yeah. I have these words. I'm sitting next to my Oxford Dictionary, which I actually look at. So yeah, and I'm not going to pull it out there. It's like really big and heavy right now. So that's my understanding of the difference. Typically you can be an isolationist and a pacifist, and it's true. Right wingers, Republicans, that are isolationists are sometimes also anti-war.
I've seen it.
I think, although, it's weird because I think the libertarians and the Republicans like Rand Paul that are anti-war, I don't think are isolationists. You know what I mean? But there are those, they do exist. I don't know if they're in office.
Well, Rand Paul,
but there are right wingers that
voice the reason. I don't know if it's isolationist reason, but on Venezuela, somebody we can listen. I think on the drug boat bombings. By the way, if you're out there listening, if you've not heard Donald Trump talk about ocean drugs, just Google Donald Trump ocean drugs, and I wish I could do the impression.
We could just be on 24/7 talking about stuff he says.
Of course. So one thing I find interesting, and this is kind of like, I'm not going to get roped in again. I'm not going to, the way I almost thought that they really were isolationists, or at least didn't like doing all this neocon shit. But or let's stop calling it that. This Democrat Republican stuff, whatever it is, this warmongering, right?
So neocons are warmongers, right? So that's an important distinction, right?
Sure. But when I say that word, it Obama's not involved, and the Hillary Clinton, the who's no fan of Iran. Anyway, so my point here is, like, one thing that I keep finding interesting, and I don't believe it because it's, and I'll explain why, is no nation building. And I know there are these schmucks out there that just love this, like, hit and run. We're gonna come in there and drop a bunch of bombs and leave, and then honestly,
how that work for Libya, or Iraq?
It's no Iranian left behind. No child left behind. Unfunded mandate. We're not going to, and listen, trust me, I'm happy they're not going to be giving, warlords bags of millions and millions of dollars, and how many cars I won't be involved. My point, I'm not endorsing any of that sort of nation building activity or any nation building, but the Trump administration saying that they're not interested in nation building is hilarious, because that's where the money. What's the famous? Oh man, how can I not think? What's his name? The famous bank robber. What did he say when they asked him why?
Clyde, like, talking about Clyde Barrow?
Or? No. It was
John Dillinger.
No. I'll think this guy's a bank. What did he ask him? What did he say when they asked him why he robbed banks? That's where the money. That's where the money is.
That's where the money is, right? Yeah.
I'll think of it. But he But
it is 1930s, though, right?
I'm not sure. But this is but that's where reconstruction is where the money is, right? Or rebuild nation building. That's where the money is. So I do not believe for a second that's where the oil is. It's where the money is. And the other thing I wanted to say, and it's a sad metaphor, is the solo protesters. All of when we talk about where the pacifist movements are, the pacifist movement is various ones, and props to, we've been talking in the newsroom a little bit about, different radical groups like Code Pink that have been just out there with that same anti-war message for a long time. But as far as the solo protesters, I think there's, the woman in DC who's been out in front of the White House. Maybe they kicked her out, Trump, bulldozer or something. But there's that. And then, the props to all the older people, the seniors down on the Cape who have endured not just horrible weather, but horrible neighbors honking and splashing them with slush. But it is so symbolic that is what the anti-war movement is. And then what's the pro-war movement? It's basically like all people who are like passively, Luke O'Neill, a good friend of ours, who of course has the Welcome to Hell World newsletter. He's really just an unbelievable writer. And I think, like a lot of his readers, he, sets me at ease, sometimes puts me on edge at others, but really is able to express a lot of things that even I as a writer have trouble with. And he has a big thing today about how, actually it was a throwback to a post from 2021 about how when these situations arise, you get the same person who, would get upset if you badmouth like the death of a celebrity, who will then just, absentmindedly be like, of course we should be bombing Iran. Everybody's better off without the, Ayatollah with a Khomeini. And it's like, what are you talking? And whether it's, and by the way, Jason, this is officially, I don't know if we get our YouTube award for it or something. This is the longest any program on the internet has existed to discuss this topic without somebody saying, listen, we're better off without the guy there. I mean, that's a fact,
Yeah, we don't think it's a good idea to just assassinate heads of state like that. It's just not, because where does it end, right?
I got one too. I got this too. However, the pronunciation Khomeini, I know it's confusing because it's not Khomeini. But I think I hear people, Iranians, talk about it and say Khomeini, right? The way I guess probably the American pronunciation, but not NPR, not the people who say Pinochet, even though the rest of the speaking world says Pinochet or Pinochet, right? And not NPR. It's Pinochet with most of the hosts there, and now it's Khomeini. It's I don't even know how to say it. It's this ludicrous intellectual pronunciation that
I don't know much about Farsi, but the vowels, and there are regional accents, of course, within Iran, but there are vowels that are pronounced differently than our vowels.
And then there's the NPR accent, always showing us that they're a little bit smarter than the rest of.
But I mean, look, we're not. We have no. Obviously, we're journalists who cover Massachusetts primarily. Sometimes the U.S. Sometimes I write about international stuff, but we are not on the ground or on any ground anywhere where the war is going on, and that's several countries already. And we're not specialists in it, right? So of course we have no crystal ball, and it would be irresponsible to even say. I mean, it's obviously irresponsible to say yay assassination by bombing, but the other stuff that people say as well, oh, the Iranians are going to do this. Oh, the Israelis are going to do that. It's maybe, there's some stuff that I'd like to say after some study about what's going on, but I'm hesitant to hold forth because what proof do I have? And that's bad journalism. I mean, we consider this show an extension of our regular journalism, so we don't want to just spew. But what we can talk about with more certitude is the way things tend to break in terms of anti-war movements in the U.S. And I think this time out, at least around Boston, and to a lesser degree even in Amherst or other little protest hotspots, usually where there's colleges, right? You're not seeing any massive turnouts yet for this kind of stuff. Partially, it's weird. Like the poll numbers of Americans on this war are not good for the Trump administration at all.
Like, well, and that's partially because it's him. Well,
it's partially because MAGA people thought that war wasn't going to be the thing that this administration did, right? It's going to, this administration is going to focus on Americans, So, okay, well, that kind of isn't playing now, right? And we can ask a lot of questions about why, what are the different forces pressuring Trump and his immediate advisors and, their people in Congress to do stuff like what's happened in Venezuela, what's happening in, what happened in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, what's been going on in that conflict, and then now this. But it's not clear, like, why and people change, of course, why the Trump of, I think it was 2013 is the quote everyone's showing, where he's criticizing Obama for being a terrible negotiator, and like kind of using force on Iran when it wasn't necessary or whatever. And now he's kind of doing the same thing or worse. And, we can speculate, but it's just that speculation. Like, I hear Trump has, just one example would be like Iran is hitting different targets with their many, many missiles and drones in many countries around them. And that, are connected at the hip to the U.S. or Israel or both. And, people are saying, you're seeing reports like, they hit a Trump interest. You see what they're doing? And I'm like, maybe, do we really know? Like, that's the kind of thing. Like,
some of those bombs don't look specific enough to hit particular interests. I don't know, but
I don't know, right? But what we can focus on though is like, here we are. Okay, we know there's this country, Iran, right? Everybody's got that. They may not know. Most Americans don't know where it is. I think Chris and I pretty much know where it is on a map. That's helpful.
It's pretty big. I think people know where Iran is. It's
about the size
big.
of Europe, right?
Yeah,
which is one reason they have a lot of missiles
on the map. So
they can move the missiles around. The U.S. can't find them. They got a lot of underground facilities. They've done a pretty good job.
So deep, we don't drop. We didn't waste a certain bomb on them. From what I've read,
the bunker busters.
Yeah, and I think this is just
No, I'm just going to say, and this country had a revolution, that was done both by left wingers and Shia Muslim clerics and their followers, and the clerics kind of, to my understanding of history at least, screwed over the left and made the left the enemy, along with the forces they had just opposed, the royalists and stuff, and killed a lot of people in the first few years in their own country. I mean, some thousands at least, imprisoned tens of thousands or whatever. Then there was, Iraq invaded, at the behest of the U.S. Terrible, terrible war between those two countries. I think Iran lost 230,000 dead and then, hundreds of thousands of more wounded. It was awful. And Iraq was led by the U.S.'s then good friend, Saddam Hussein. And, we provided him with chemical and biological weapons that he used on the Iranians, who refused to use those kinds of weapons of mass destruction also, as well as nukes. And, all this is in the background to Iran suffered mightily for its attempt to be independent of big countries and to get control of its oil reserves and stuff like that. On the other hand, it functionally has been a dictatorship of a different type. Before it had a king, which was a dictatorship, the Shah, right? The Pahlavi dynasty. And then it had this council of ayatollahs, leaders of the Iranian Shia Muslim religion with many, many followers. And it's all very complicated and confusing. And now today, the reason I mention all this is not because I'm Mr. Iranian history expert, although obviously I'm going to be reading about stuff when it starts happening again, which I haven't done in some years. And I just happen to be reading a book that I do want to review. They're called The Revolutionists. That's talking about the transition between left-wing terrorism in the 70s to Islamic terrorism, right? There were connections. Iran's revolution shows such a connection. You had a simultaneous left-wing Islamic uprising, right? And yes, the Islamic uprising had socialist characteristics. I wouldn't necessarily say the reverse was true of the left being religious, because I think in Iran they were not, right? But now today, if we are going to be covering, let's just put it this way, protest movements might be a better way to talk about what we're going to be covering, we think, if this drags on, which it may or may not. That's something else there's a lot of speculation about. Does the U.S. only have 2 or 3 weeks of munitions? That may be true. Is the U.S. looking like it's going to do a ground invasion? Because not really, although there's been some noise about that. Whatever, for however long this is going to last, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or years, we're going to see some protests in Boston, absolutely, right? We have all these colleges here. Naturally, we're going to have a lot of kids from Iran are here, or kids who come from places like the West Coast, where tons of royalist and Western allied Iranians and former left-wingers ended up going because they were allowed to come to the U.S. after the Iranian Revolution in significant numbers. So you've got, I don't know, a couple generations of Iranian Americans. Their kids go to school here too. The kinds of grudges that result from these kinds of conflicts are epic and just go on for generations, right? So we have a confusing situation from the like a regular American kind of anti-war, typically left-wing, although not always left-wing, but anti-war perspective, because like you've got people who are going like, we're Iranian, rah, 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 President Trump bombing Iran, rah, 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 killing this Ayatollah, right, this leader, and then we've got people on the left, right, who are definitely not pacifists, right? We could talk about specific groups. We don't really have to.
Well,
that are pretty much like I'll just finish up. That are pretty much, rah rah the current Iranian regime. Then you've got people, quite a few from England, I'm noticing, different pundits and scholars, mostly younger women actually, who are like, wait a minute, like you've got people on the left telling us that we're all stooges for the imperialist nations like the US and the UK, and you've got, people on the right criticizing us, for not wanting a new king, like the son of the former Shah, has been trying to kind of get back on the stage, even though he's lived in the US all these decades, whatever. And they're like, there is an authentic, they say, Islamic resistance pardon me, folks, Iranian, democratic resistance movement that's broad and deep and has been involved in many, many protest waves over the years. It includes a lot of young women in particular that, doesn't want to be ruled by the US and the UK and oil companies and other multinationals, and also doesn't want the current regime to continue. So you've got, then you've got the kinds of folks we started talking about, like kind of people that don't like war and don't think anything good can come out of what is happening, what the US and Israel are doing, right? So those are that's the lay of the land. And then, yeah, Chris, there's some maybe right-wingers in the US that are just so in Trump's camp, even though he keeps weaving and bobbing, that they're like, yes, today we love this war. Right?
Yeah.
Right? So that's what we got.
Some of them were reportedly 12 hours before the public knew there was a war, celebrating at Joe's Stone Crab in DC. I'm not sure if that is true. It's just, and singing "Bomb Iran" to the tune of Barbara Ann. So we will have.
Yeah, I grew up listening to "Bomb, Bomb, 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 Bomb Iran." Yeah.
Well, so again, nothing. History repeats itself, and this.
Who were the first people killed? A bunch of little girls.
Middle East.
A bunch of little girls. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Middle Eastern history in particular. No, and it's just, and I think, and so we see it, and I got to say, it is interesting because, Well, on one hand, we see in situations like this the not so how a lot of the regular. This is the time to watch the CBS, this ABC, at what is it, 7 o'clock news can actually be decent, not in what it's actually reporting, but in its alleged neutrality. Or, oh, and by the way, we cannot forget to remind people that there is a coalition of reporters right now insisting on having access to Israel and to Gaza in particular. I'm sorry, and it's really, it just says a lot, and people should really look into it. Jason, we should put in the show notes a good reference to it. But yeah, we're not on the ground, but really nobody is in certain situations. So, and
I mean, I have one friend, right, Kareem Chahayeb, who's been working for Associated Press in Beirut, where he's from, for years, and I've already been sharing around some of the reporting he and his fellow Associated Press reporters are doing there, because they are there. They're like in a place that's getting bombed by Israel, and
Crazy.
they're on the internet, they're on TV, they can be seen and heard in real time. So there we can say, yeah, we do know someone, right? Israel's locked down, yes.
Yeah,
right?
and the real access is just really bad. And by the way, I'll be with some of these reporters in Indianapolis this week at IRE/NICAR. I think it was Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting, right? Old school data journalism. And but yeah, and IRE investigative reporters and editors speaking about our opioid settlements. But as for the panels I go to, I look forward to hearing a lot about, of course, not just domestic issues and police, but some of the reporters, doing the good work out overseas, as well as Epstein files stuff, all of this stuff that we don't really dip our toes in too much locally. Although I think maybe we should, I think it's time now, with some more heads rolled at Harvard, to take a more BINJ, longer look at what is some of the local collateral damage impact of Epstein, if it's worthwhile. We of course have a million other things that we are looking at as well. So
but I think, our difficulty in covering anti-war stuff is, first of all, we don't have a bunch of money to have a bunch of reporters on the ground. We do, however, have 30 interns, at least some of whom have already expressed interest in covering different kinds of protests that Chris and I are just looking at, like, as we always do, what isn't being covered and what's left of the rest of the press around here, right? And we know that younger reporters, wherever they work, tend to be more sympathetic to stuff like anti-war movements and things. They haven't had it beaten out of them. They haven't got the self-censor in their heads yet that they're supposed to have if they're working for like a bigger TV outlet or the Globe or someplace like that. Don't have feelings, like about what you're reporting. And we're not like that. We're like, no, you should have feelings, but you got to back up your feelings with good reporting. And like, Chris and I personally are not going to love every sort of political group that happens to be protesting the war. I forgot to mention one group of folks, which is, religious Muslims who just like the current regime in Iran. Like, they're into it. Those folks are here in Boston too. So, I mean, you're going to see, and I have already seen most of the factions I'm describing having protests of some kind or another, or celebrations simultaneously at times. They just haven't been very big. So, I mean, in a way, we're almost getting ahead of ourselves talking about this, because, you're going to see the Party of Socialism and Liberation, who we actually covered their candidate recently for, Senate, right? There are groups like them. There's Democratic Socialists of America. There's certainly Mass Peace Action, which is long running. I wouldn't, I don't know if they consider themselves entirely pacifist in every single thing. Certainly many pacifists are in that group. We've seen those kinds of groups sending, I don't know, we see their press releases will say, like, we had 500. I look at the scene, Chris looks at the scene, we're experienced with this stuff. We've covered a bunch of this stuff. It doesn't look that big to me.
And don't forget, groups like that get pushed aside when things become fad. So, but they'll still be there. They'll show up and they have their flags. And if you know what you're looking for, you can find them.
You can tell by the font on the signs usually if you know what you're doing, like who's who.
Yeah,
right?
I gotta say, sometimes you and I are the cranks. I understand. I relate. When you are someone who doesn't give up and society decides it and normalizes something, like there's a guy who has been protesting I don't know if he's for years protested Boston City Council's clear violations of open meeting law, and he was right, for the most part. And I wrote about it a few times. But how many times
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You ultimately just you get beaten down, right? You get demoralized, and that's the anti-war movement in America.
And covering protests is boring. Like when you're a journalist,
not a lot happens, and
it's like people are out there waving signs, they're giving speeches. I mean, so you cover it one week, or even if it's a very, very big protest movement like Occupy, you cover it more than once in a week, even as an individual reporter. And it starts to become kind of the same. And you can, all of these, I don't even know if I want to call like the current situation like a movement at this point, right. But larger protest movements, I mean, have a lifespan, like everything in life is a bell curve, right? It goes up, it's up for a bit, and then it goes down. So like you'll get a lot of excitement about certain protest movements, and it lasts a while. But the big problem we have in the U.S., as in so many countries, and it's worse now under the Trump administration, but it's been true for my whole life, is that most stuff like this kind of protest, even when hundreds of thousands or millions of people are involved, is that the ruling establishment ignores it, really, And in this situation, where you think, well, isn't this low-hanging fruit for the federal Democrats? Yeah, they haven't been saying very much, have they?
The difference here, but one difference, of course, is this is a midterm year, and presidents don't usually start wars while they're up against the ropes and about to get destroyed in the midterms anyway. And we do, and listen, we live in Massachusetts, where frankly these people don't put in as much face time as they should. And now they can do no wrong because they're Democrats from Massachusetts. But on other places across the country, it's not like that. In fact, it's the opposite. They still have to get out there in front of people. And we're going to see, because our little, pseudo-intellectual pals on Facebook may have their their rationalization for supporting war. But guess what? The people who are actually who have kids in the military and who are already, their farms already fucked, they've singing a much different tune in their town halls with their elected officials. So that's what I am looking forward to. It will start as soon as this weekend. You're going to see that shit popping off big time, because and that'll speak louder. Because listen, I am sick of hearing about as if it's some liberal monolith on the East Coast. It's bullshit. We all know it. But there's also merit in a lot of it because of the voices we do hear emerging from places like Boston and New York. With so with that said, it is always interesting, because I was going to say before, there's nothing cheaper than looking for a person who typically disagrees with you to prove your point, which is what everybody does with like Iran, right? I'm going to do it right now though, and say that because it won't be like it won't look like the pacifist movement on Boston Common. It will look like a guy in Carhartts and a woman in Carhartts or whatever it is. I think I'm wearing a Champion. So even when we are snobs, even when we wear the Carhartt in the Massachusetts. But when the good old folks, now I'm doing what the politicians do, but you know what? It works, because that's who you said they don't listen. Yes, Trump doesn't give a damn if 100,000 people gather.
Well, neither do the Democrats. That's what I'm saying.
But when they really get their asses handed up, which by the way, the numbers are just, and I hate, you hate that Democrats are just going to look at everything, the midterms, and as a validation, but they really are looking pretty horrible for the Republicans already. This is not going to help. This is not going to help. This is not going to help in those deep.
So you're saying that they're quiet in part because it's beneficial to them to be quiet, right? And I'm saying part of the reason they're quiet at the federal level. And again, I want to differentiate between local and state Democrats and federal ones. There is quite a large distinction. My feeling is the further away politicians are from the grassroots, and this is true of any party, but especially the Democrats in this era, the more they're just not really caring. They're hearing the voice of their corporate paymasters much louder than anybody on the ground, right? And a lot of them don't have skin in the game these days with kids in the military either. But I think that they would also have done the same thing. That's what I'm getting at. They've done it before. Democrats have attacked Iran one way or the other. And, if you want to try to differentiate between sanctions and bombing, good luck. Because, this kind of sanctions we've had on Iran, people die because of that stuff. When hospitals don't have supplies,
they do plenty of business with China, I believe.
They don't do enough. And there's there's always corruption, right? No matter how holy roller they may be, there's corruption in Iran, there's corruption in every country. And they're only able to get, so much oil out to sell, illegally, quote unquote, right? And they don't have a lot of other stuff they can sell. So I'm just saying that whatever one thinks of Iran and its government, the approach the Democrats and the Republicans both take has and will continue to include stuff like we're seeing right now. Like we have no way of knowing that Democratic leaders in an alternate universe where Trump lost this last presidential election wouldn't be doing exactly the same thing, wouldn't be doing basically the same thing in Ukraine and so on and so forth, right? Because we mustn't forget that there are big, again, corporations out there, military corporations, carbon industries like the oil industry, gas industry, and so on. Lots of money's in play. It's never just what's being put out by political leadership. It's never, that's the stuff that Trump is saying is never.
No, it's not
the only reason for this kind of conflict.
He had a press conference and went and talked about the ballroom instead. So it's
whatever.
It's not really.
And people that are saying this is about Epstein, maybe, right? That's probably somewhere.
Venezuela was also, happened.
Yeah,
since
Epstein.
So it's all.
You can say that, and there's some truth to it, but is that the reason that this is happening?
Right.
No, there are many reasons, and we don't know what they all are, right? We can only infer some of it. In terms of protest movements, I think Chris and I look for the groups that we judge to be the sharpest, the most on the ball, the least likely to be, a lot of the protest groups, like any group of humans, they get in their own bubble. And I know because I was one of them for a long, long time. Like I was a leader of a lot of these kinds of protest, upsurges and in this area and also nationally. And as journalists, we're trying to, whatever our opinions, we are trying to be fair. We are trying to be accurate. We're trying to think about is what this group said here that we're going to now report. Is there truth to that? Are they getting kind of lost in their own narrative? Are they, like, for example, the people that are like rah current Iranian government? Really? Like, is that a position that, Marxist group X over here or religious group Y really wants to they want to die on that hill? Do they expect us to report that? Like, just like that, right? We'll run op-eds by any opinion pieces. You all out there want to run an opinion piece, as long as you're not calling for like massacring populations or eating babies, we'll run it. But
it's about them. It's about reasonable position. I want to wrap it up. I just want to.
Yeah,
no, don't be sorry. This has been a great conversation. I say, for me, it's we had a commenter recently about some surveillance stuff, and they, of course, when it's just some right winger who finds us, which is increasing, which is that a good thing about that? And they're like, and it's kind of funny because the libertarians,
fair, Chris. That's
people used to agree about surveillance, right? But when it's police related, which it typically is, but there's a cognitive dissonance there, right? But people say, "Oh, you're just against all surveillance, and we should just be able to do whatever." And I say, "Well, no, but should we have rules? Should we have a protocol for how this stuff is used?" And never are they like, "Oh, well, I hadn't thought of it like that." But that's the nuance. And with war, there's a lot of that. So sure, I can't speak for Jason. I come from just a pacifist perspective because it's just Mr. Rogers' neighborhood over here, and war is bad.
Why can't we have that? Yeah.
Well, the other thing is I like facts and history, and I guess what I'm proven right by every goddamn war. I was an idiot. I guess what if I had been proven wrong when I did know nothing, when I was just out of college, following the group that said this is bad and you are lying and there are no weapons of mass destruction and this is a big money grab and Bush is a monster and all of that. If I had followed that group and then found out later that was wrong, which I don't even think the right says that, because all I hear is whether it's Tucker Carlson or Alex Jones, whoever the hell it is, everyone agrees that was all wrong and bullshit. So I was right there as a novice. Now I have some, 25 plus years experience under my belt as a reporter. Someone actually understands how government works to a certain degree, more local states, sure, but I've been around, and now Donald Trump's in power, and I'm naive. Fuck that. It's nonsense, and I won't have it, and I won't be called at any of the things, and at least nobody is the unpatriotic nonsense has not surfaced that I've seen.
Yeah, not a little bit, but it's not really
nor
working.
Has the patriotic nonsense, really, the jingoistic stuff, and I'll say I think that's actually a good sign, because if it had if it was reverberating and people were changing their like their Facebook profile pictures, that would be because it had started on the right, but I'm not even really seeing that the AI American flag trucks flying down the highway with 42 stars.
No, it's very different than the Gulf War in 1991, the Iraq War of 2003 to 2011, at the beginning at least.
They're not even manufacturing consent. They don't even.
That's exactly right. This has been much remarked upon, and we've definitely seen that fact. Like, the Trump administration just doesn't give a shit. Like, that's how they're handling press. It's like, Kristi Noem can get up there and just say one thing one moment, another the next, and with a completely straight face say she was telling the truth both times. And they just don't care.
She said she stared down the Korea, Kim Jong-un. She said it, and then it's in her book. You wrote it.
It's in her book. It must be true.
In a published book, and then said we're reviewing that anyway.
So we got that kind of take on this. They're just like, we're doing it because we're doing it because we're doing it, and yay us, yay America. And even the patriotic Americans are like, wait, now what? So what are we patriotic about here now? First thing we hear is 150 children killed, right? And even super less thoughtful patriot types in the MAGA movement or outside it in the neocon wing or whatever, the right, they must take pause. They can say they don't believe it. They could say the Iranians are lying about it. They can say it's all AI deep fakes. All right, but I mean, people are dropping bombs. People are firing missiles, right?
And then it's impossible to believe that anybody got hurt. I know.
Yeah, just like it's hard to believe that that it was the Kuwaitis that shot down the American planes, not the Iranians, right? Like, this is, as journalists, we're like always watching for spin. We can't prove anything yet. Maybe people on the ground will. Maybe they won't. Maybe the journalists on the ground are paid agents of somebody or other. We don't know. All we can do is try to cover what we can see, right? Which is stuff that happens here. So yeah, if there's interesting meetings, like people protesting, for example, at city council meetings, the state house, whatever. There's rival factions yelling at each other in the street. Hopefully not more than that. We can try to at least analyze it if we don't have boots on the ground. Younger other journalists covering stuff, or we can't get there. We're wide open to opinion pieces, right? Even opinion pieces like where I'm going to pick it up and go, yeah, some CIA cop wrote that one. If someone submits it to us, almost certainly we're going to run an opinion piece. People can say, we want obviously to get press releases at, I don't know if I have this, I can pull it up at info@binj.news. So info@binj.news, just like the Binge News you see up in the corner above me here. You can email us. You can send us press releases. Let us know what you're doing. Just try to give us some notice. I mean, I know things are happening in the moment with a war like this. It's quick. Things can change from hour to hour, and people that are going to do any kind of protest can't always get their act together fast enough. But let us know. We do read the press releases. We can't cover everything, but if we see something and we have enough notice, and it's looking interesting, and it's looking like it's going to be pretty significant, we want to try to make sure that our reporters are going to give a much fairer hearing to that action than they're usually going to get on larger news outlets who just dismiss. They effectively, larger news outlets dismiss democracy, which is how we view these activities. To us, protest and stuff is part of democracy, right? It's one way people try to make their opinions heard. You're never going to see, probably never, although like the Iranian Revolution, supposedly like half the population of Tehran was out in the streets, at that moment. There are periods in history when that kind of thing can happen. But if you're seeing, certainly a couple thousand people on an issue like this pretty quickly, it's pretty significant. And if you start to see more, then that's giving you an idea of what the zeitgeist is. So we want to try to get on top of that and telegraph what people are saying. Not that we have like a giant audience, but, we will often cover stuff that larger publications might zero in on once they see us do it, So there are different ways that we get stuff out there that maybe the average protest group can't. That's it. I don't know. And was there anything else you want to talk about, Chris? We had a couple of other ideas.
I got to wrap it up, man.
All right. Well, good night, folks. This has been fun as usual, and we'll be back next week with someone probably that we don't know, but in 2 weeks
let's do a not political one. Let's do a vintage one with the people from Found or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what we were going to talk about: vintage stuff and stamps.
Yeah, I got to run.
The World Stamp Expo is happening.
We'll do it for real, okay?
But we're going to have Shira Lasharin, a protege of Chris's and mine, another journalist, musician, all-around talented person on the show in 2 weeks. So that we do know. So thanks, folks. We'll be back next Tuesday at 8.